Yes. Oh, the microphone works. Good. Thank you for coming on this lovely spring day. I'm just going to tell you today about the life and the accomplishments of Choi, known as Go-un. He is one of Korea's great figures, somebody you may have already heard of, somebody you will hear about quite a bit. He lived about 1100 years ago. Certainly active about 900 AD, or CE, as it were. That's in Chinese. He's one of Korea's favorite figures, we can say in general, a culture hero of Korea. He exemplifies a certain unity, a certain continuity in Korea between Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. In particular, in later centuries, Confucianism came very much into conflict with Buddhism, and the Neo-Confucianists of the Joseon dynasty were suppressing Buddhism quite severely. But he represents a harmony between those and even developed his own theory of harmony between those three different religious traditions here in Korea. In China, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism are very distinctly different, institutionally different from each other. It's important to understand this from the beginning of there, that Taoism and Buddhism are different religions and they're rivals against each other. For most of their history, they were in competition for favor from the government, for funding, literally, and to not be suppressed. And so they remained as rivals to each other with different, rather similar looking temples and institutions, but different doctrines, and emphasizing the differences between each other as only coming together, but rather informally in the tradition of Chan Buddhism, which we know as Sun Bulgyo or Zen Buddhism. In Korea, this did not happen. Taoism was imported to Korea along with the Buddhism. It came in with Buddhist missionaries, brought in Taoist scriptures as well as Confucian scriptures, Confucian teachings, along with their entire entourages. And these three things come into Korea together, mainly under the leadership of Buddhism. Korea was officially, royally Buddhist for 1,000 years. Taoism never officially established, except very briefly in the Goguryeo kingdom up north, and that was a disaster. And so no other kingdom in Korea ever had an official Taoist establishment. Therefore, the Taoist religion and Taoist philosophy existed here in Korea, but mixed in together with other things, particularly Korean shamanism, that it made a very strong partnership with, and also with Korean Buddhism. Korean Buddhism, therefore, has more Taoism in it than any other kind of Buddhism in the world. And Choi is a part of this whole story. He led an amazing life, and I'm going to walk you through it with photos of the sites that are associated with the different parts of his life. He's just quite an incredible figure of Korean history. Left quite a legacy. Here, many things. He's known, the date of his death is not known. We do know just the date of his birth. And he's known as an immortal, one of the 4 Koreans, only 4, said to have achieved Taoist immortality, meaning that he left his physical body behind but remained in this earthly realm as a spirit for some undeterminate length of time until fading away as spirits do, but achieved what the Taoists in China call the status of being an immortal. 4 Koreans are credited with this, and he's one, and by far the best known, the best documented. The other 3, we know very little about them, not much beyond their names. Within Choi, this is a map of South Korea, and you can see on here all these little things are sites in South Korea associated with Chechiwan in some way. Either he lived there, he visited there, did something, or there is a shrine or monument for him there. This many. There's 100 of them, almost 100. Something, I think it's 89 of these are numbered. There's one that is now in North Korea. This is Seoul right here, the Han River right there. There's one that's up in North Korea, Gaesong, the ancient capital of Goryeo, but otherwise everything down in what is now South Korea. So many sites. I have managed to visit about half of these so far, taking photographs and gathering information. More to go, quite a bit. Now, that shouldn't be there. Now, wait a minute. Yes. Okay, the primary sites associated with him, we kind of put into categories: sites of his birth, government service, and his early life in Korea. And then he went to China. Then coming back from China, the things he did in Korea, government service, and then becoming a Taoist immortal living at Buddhist temples and having quite a lot of association with Korean Buddhism and its temples, these kind of sites here. I'm going to see these in more detail. Okay, starting with Sangyundae, which is Baekunsan, the White Cloud Mountain. It's 1,278 meters, one of the high mountains of Korea. It's on the Baekdudaegan mountain range, the main backbone spine range of Korea, just above Jirisan, the great Jirisan, where the Baekdudaegan begins in the south, and then a whole range of mountains running up to North Korea to the border with China, forming the definition, really, of the Korean peninsula. This mountain is one of that chain, and it's a very holy mountain, a very venerated mountain that's along the way just north of Jirisan. And there's a place here that, according to legend, in 856, we have the record, his mother came to this place, and this is pretty far from their family house, which is in Gyeongju on the east coast. So coming all the way into what is now, this is now the border between North Jeolla province and South Gyeongsang province, Gyeongsang-namdo. It's the borderline between them. So right to the center of Korea. His mother traveled over here wishing to have a son, and having heard that this is a very holy place, great place to pray for this, she comes here and climbs high up on the mountain, about 800 meters high, to a special place where there's a water spring. There's a place where water's coming out of the mountain. It's reputed to be a holy water. And his mother came up there and drank the water and prayed all night and had a vision. Gwanseum Bosal. It was depicted here in this hall. Certainly, the Bodhisattva of compassion appeared sitting on a lotus flower, appeared to his mother and said, "You shall have a son, and he shall be a great man," from her all-night praying on this place. Later, in 924, it said when Chechiwan was then already 60 years old or so, and a great famous sage by this time, he came back there and authorized, sponsored somehow, the building of a Buddhist temple on that site to honor his mother's vision of the Bodhisattva of compassion, and a temple was built there specially dedicated to Gwanseum Bosal, and became one of the great temples of Korea for that worship. This is that temple today. From here, in a distance, you're looking down here, this massive ridge in the distance, that's Jirisan. That's Jirisan, the great, holiest, most sacred mountain of Korea, where Korean Buddhism flourished. Very great. And this big ridge line coming out, and right there in that valley cleft at the bottom, if it's a clear day, supposedly you can see this, is Shilsangsa. Shilsangsa is one of the great Buddhist temples of Korea, one of the top 20 greatest temples. It's one of the original temples of Sun Bulgyo, or Zen Buddhism. I lectured previously about the Gusan Sun Moon, the original 9 temples of Zen Buddhism. That's one of them, down in there, Shilsangsa. And so this temple site has a view directly to Shilsangsa in the south. And later, this was just a worship site for the Bodhisattva of compassion, but then Shilsangsa took this over 100 years later, took over this site and made it a Zen Buddhism teaching center. And for a while, it flourished for hundreds of years as one of the great centers where many monks became enlightened and found enlightenment through Zen Buddhism at this site. Later, fell into disuse because it's just too remote during the Joseon dynasty, fell into ruins and disuse. And then during the partisan fighting of the Korean War, it was destroyed. North Korean soldiers were hiding up in this area, and the South bombed the area and destroyed all the remains that were left. This was then reconstructed starting in the 1970s or 80s. They started rebuilding up here. Unfortunately, nothing much left, but this stone monument saying Sangyundae, it means above a lotus flower, or on top of lotus flower. That's the Bodhisattva of compassion sitting on a lotus flower above that, and dae meaning platform. The lotus flower serving as a platform from which to teach. It's got this great old tree, at least remaining from the old days of the hollow trunk and the monk's residence. It's on a very steep slope, an image there of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Gwanseom Bosal, on a wall. The reconstructed temple is not Sunbulgyo anymore. It has returned to being a special prayer site for Gwanseom Bosal. Right. There you go, and this is the water, the holy water that comes out of the rocks up there, and a little Buddha statue and offerings that people place there. The holy water that Chechiwan's mother drank. So that's just the story of his conception. He gets that kind of beginning, and you see it's very Buddhist, very strongly Buddhist associated. You know, this is the main hall of that temple now, Sangyundae, and up to the peak of the mountain, one of Korea's great mountains, although very remote, not often visited. Now, this is where his mother returned here and was pregnant and gave birth here. This is in Gyeongju, the ancient capital, the capital of the Shilla Kingdom. At this time, in the middle 800s, one of the biggest cities in the world. Scholars think it was certainly within the top 10 biggest cities in the world. It had like nearly 1 million residents from 750 to 850, just behind places like Rome and Byzantium, and about half the size of the capital of China. It was so big because of Silk Road trade, of course, commercial trade. This is where the Silk Road kind of ended on the Asian mainland and went to shipping from the coast of Gyeongju, shipping back and forth to Japan for the true end of the Silk Road. So anyway, the Choi family, one of the aristocratic families, not really high-level aristocrats, lower-level aristocrats, lower level, the 6th ranking out of the aristocrats of those days in Shilla, 6th rank from the top. But this is their house now, and marks the site where Chechiwan was born. There was a Choi family before him, but he's such a great figure that they call him their ancestor. They don't really have the name of their actual ancestor hundreds of years before. It's just not really recorded, so they regard him as the ancestor of the clan. Very famous story about him that is still invoked by Koreans today with their education fever. When he was 12 years old, he was a great student, brilliant student as a young man. 12 years old, his father sent him off to China for advanced study, because the Tang Dynasty, that's where the great universities and such were. Nothing in Korea was good enough. Father told him, go to Tang Dynasty. He said, you pass the exam or don't come home. the high-level government exam, extremely difficult to pass. It's like the same thing like getting into university today, getting into Seoul National University. His father said, if you don't pass the exam, you're not my son. Rather severe. So at 12 years old, he was sent alone, just with a retinue of travelers, alone to the capital of China. To study, and he studied there for years, and in only 6 years, when he was 18, he passed the exam. That's remarkably young for those days. Most men were maybe in their 20s by the time they could pass, even the Chinese themselves. But as a foreigner there, he passed the exam when he was 18. The Tang Dynasty was very impressed by him. The emperor himself called him in for an interview. And he was a young emperor who had just taken the throne fairly recently, and he met Che, and they got along. They actually kind of became friends. The emperor favored him. He gave him a special silk purse as a token of personal favor to him. The Tang Dynasty was very open, and so was Korea at this time, with the Silk Road trade going on. Very different from later Korea. Open internationally, globalization. Open. They hired foreigners. The Tang Dynasty had people like from Persia or Arabs from the Middle East, Lebanese, whatever. Jewish merchants came in and were allowed to set up synagogues. The Tang Dynasty would hire such people to work for them, even work in the government. Much different and in Shilla, also in Korea, much more globalized than, say, 1,000 years later, when it was so closed down and no foreigners permitted, more the Korea we think about. But anyway, so this globalization was there, and he served as a government official. The Tang, they could do that, and after he graduated, the emperor told him, you can't go home. No, you stay here, work for me. And he worked for the national government in the capital city, Xi'an, nearby where he had studied and visited temples. We'll get to that later. Then he was appointed as a magistrate of a county. A very honorable thing for a foreigner or whatever, being appointed head of a county in there. This is what is now there from that county. That pagoda was built a few hundred years after Chechiwan, maybe 200 years later, so it's not from him. But this is now the museum area in that county in China. He is still memorialized. They still remember him as a really good county magistrate. He was upright and proper and honest and a good scholar and fair and balanced. They put up a statue of him. This is a tour group, and here we are. This is him, memorialized there. This guy is now the head of the Kyungju Che family, Chechiwan's family. So his descendant from the oldest son to oldest son to oldest son to oldest son down there for 1,100 years. That's the guy who is now oldest son and leader of the Kyungju Che family. I went there with them to see this memorial and such. So, thing. Now, moving then to Yangzhou City, which is over here. He was later appointed by the emperor to Yangzhou City, at that time the richest city in China. Famous for its salt trade. It was big on salt, and salt used to be very valuable back then, not so common in China. And then it's on the Grand Canal, on the Grand Canal of China, between the two rivers that had been built to a very high level during the Tang Dynasty. And the city is right on there, and it grew as a commercial trading city into the richest city in China in those days, and still today known as a prosperous place. He was appointed governor of Yangzhou City because he was so honest and upright and uncorruptible. You had to have somebody like that for the richest city in China because corruption was so easy, so everywhere and such. He was appointed for that. This is the guy that you're going to see later, the memorial they have for him in there. He served as an excellent governor of Yangzhou City, had a great record for more than a decade, and there was a rebellion at that time, the An Lushan rebellion at the end of the Tang Dynasty that nearly destroyed China, nearly destroyed the Tang Dynasty, a huge rebellion of starving peasants and a warlord leader. He helped to put down the rebellion. He was an advisor to the top general in eastern China fighting against this. He advised some brilliant strategy and caused some victory against the rebels. And finally, he wrote a poem, a kind of poem as a letter, sent it to the rebel leader, which was scathingly insulting in the poetic Chinese way. It was such a thing that caused the rebel leader to have an attack. He had heart troubles from reading this, and he fainted and fell on the floor. And after that, he lost his confidence, and his men lost confidence in him, and the rebellion was defeated within a year or so after that. So Chechiwan was credited with this, and the Chinese still today remember him. I mean, historically minded Chinese remember him as a great Korean who really was, an upstanding man. Now, all this time, remember, he's a Confucian. He's following Confucianism. He studied Confucianism. But still, you can say, kind of, as a person from Korea at that time, he's a Buddhist, in the sense that kind of everybody was a Buddhist. The general culture of Korea by the 800s had been Buddhist for hundreds of years. Everybody was a Buddhist. Even the Confucian officials who worked for the government, they still did Buddhist practice and Buddhist teachings in their free time. They were not separated in those days. It was not a different thing in the Buddhist, but he makes his great accomplishments as a Confucian, as a government official. He stays in China until middle age, quite a long time, really, 869 to 884. He studies and then serves as an official. This is nearly 20 years. He goes until he's middle-aged. Then he returns to Korea finally. He felt lonely. He felt that his parents were getting old and that he had written letters to his parents, but he can't see them. And as a good Confucian and a good son, he should see his parents before they die. Also, it is said that he heard that Korea was very corrupt by this time, that the Shilla dynasty of Korea was falling due to utter corruption, decadence, degeneracy in the capital city of Gyeongju. And he thought, I should help my country. I should try to save my country. I know what to do. And also he wanted to see his parents. There's two different stories. But anyway, he petitioned to the emperor of China. There was a new emperor. His friend had died, and there was a new emperor. And the new emperor said, oh, finally, okay, you're my great official, but you can go. He loaded him up with gifts, huge gifts from the emperor saying, I wish you would stay. You're one of our best, but you can go to your country back then and help them. So he did. He comes back to Korea, and for 10 years, he's a government official in Korea, a local official. Again, because his family is sixth-ranking aristocrats. Even though he's so talented and he is such a record, and he was governor of a huge city in China, but he couldn't do that here in Korea because his sixth-ranking family. Korea, very rigid caste society, much more than China. You could not do other than what your father did. You could not advance up or go down. You were stuck at the same level. So he did this. He was at first, as we know, in Daesan County of Jeollado, and he's credited there with designing a certain kind of pavilion with a flowing stream of water for gentlemen to drink and have conversation, and made a kind of peaceful paradise out of that county where people were known to live a very good life without privation. Minor reputation from there. Nearby, and he moved the next county over and built this Pihyangjeon Pavilion, a fragrance-draped pavilion. So 860, and then it was reconstructed in 1716, so that's what we're looking at here is the 1716 one, of course. That still exists today. It's in the middle of the city now, but back then it was surrounded by gardens and a pond and such. And he built this beautiful pavilion for overlooking and enjoying leisure. This is the pond that remains of it that now are just a mud flats that now exist, and a round island there with decorative trees. Some beautiful garden paradise. In that area, the Musung Soan was later built during the Joseon dynasty when all of Korean became Confucian. Chechiwan was regarded as one of the greatest Confucian heroes. This entire Soan, or a private academy for teaching of Confucianism, was built dedicated to him and such. He is enshrined, this is his portrait that's enshrined at the altar, and they still do ceremonies there every single year for him, remembering him. This is a photo of the ceremony that they conduct with the wine, the old-fashioned Confucian style. All right, this is an official portrait of him, a copy of one from back in the old days when he was serving as a county magistrate. That's the kind of uniform, the kind of robes he has on. And here he's really depicted here as a proper Confucian official with the golden dragon head incense burner and the writing brushes prominently there and the rather Chinese style decorations behind him. A proper Confucian official. And that out in Gunsan City, way on the west coast, he later served out there as an official briefly, and they built this Hyangyo, a lower level Confucian school, kind of a Confucian public school, and that is dedicated to him, along with he is enshrined together with Confucius himself from China and Dangun, the founder of Korea, the first king of the first Korean kingdom, a mythical figure. They are enshrined together here, which made it quite fascinating. That deserves a whole topic of its own. But this is the monument dedicated to him with the double dragons and shrine and pavilion there out in Gunsan City. Nearby in Gunsan, also the Yeongmi Soan is also dedicated to Chechiwan out there in Gunsan, which are mainly famous now for United States Navy port, Korean Navy port, and I think an Air Force base and such. It's kind of a military and fishing area, but they have quite a bit there that is in remembering him as a good official. Then, the most interesting part, really, as he becomes sage, he returned at this beginning point here, 1895 to 96, returned to the capital city of Gyeongju. By this time, the degeneracy, the corruption of the government, they had a female leader, a queen, who is supposedly ruling Korea, but not really ruling. Her male relatives were manipulating. Supposedly there were sex orgies, there were opium drugs, a problem, excessive drinking, of course, this is Korea, whatever, but the decadence and corruption, the government was collapsing noticeably. Warlords were rising in the provinces. Chechiwan made a famous memorial 10 points of reform. As a brilliant Confucian, he wrote out a simple essay outlining 10 points by which the government should reform itself. This is still a model used in Korean political science departments and studies of history, of political history, of an excellent essay about the reform of government and points that should have been followed and might have saved the dynasty. But because he was sixth-ranking official, nobody would really listen to him. The Queen did receive his 10 points essay, but nothing happened. Nothing was adopted. The corruption continued. Finally, then, just in pure disappointment, sheer disappointment, he picked up his walking stick, put on his hat, and walked out of the capital. Just walked away from his family, from his office, from his government, everything, just walked away, went to the mountains. And this is where sagehood begins, perhaps. This is, of course, a bit like a Buddhist monk leaving home. But this is near the end of his life, but in late middle age, let's say, in just great disappointment that he's not being followed, and he's realizing really that the dynasty is finished, that the great Shilla dynasty, after 300 years, that they're finished, they're collapsing. There's no way to save it. There's nothing to do but go to the mountains and retreat. The last time I was here, I talked about Master Dosun Guksa, designing Korean Pungsujiri, who lived at the same time as Chechiwan, a little bit older than Chechiwan, but they were alive at the same time. They're both in South Korea, wandering in the mountains at that time. There's no record that they ever met, but it's fascinating to think that they might have and imagine their conversation. Dosun Guksa, as I told you in last fall's lecture, took the opposite point of view. He realized that Shilla kingdom was collapsing and the government was finished. He set to work designing the next dynasty, making an architecture, writing out a plan for how the next dynasty would be established, and the next dynasty actually followed his plan. They actually adopted it and said, let's do this, and really did it. That was Dosun. Chechiwan, the opposite figure of just going in the mountains and just give up, nothing I can do, and himself kind of fading away, becoming legendary, becoming ultimately mythical, becoming an immortal spirit, fading off into the, just as at the same time exactly as the Shilla kingdom really died in civil war, and as a kingdom it faded away, became legend, became history. He takes this attitude. He goes first here. The first place he's thought to have gone at Jirisan, again, our most holy sacred mountain. This is just south of where his mother had prayed for his conception. The next big mountain south, Jirisan, and he's on the south slope, what is now called the Daesung Gegok. Daesung means great sage. The great sage Gord, it's named that because he was here. He is the great sage. He came here to the Daesung Gegok, a really beautiful part of Jirisan, and very remote. This is still famous. This is just above the green tea valley of Korea, where the main green tea production of Korea is. The Sangesa area, what's called the Hwage Valley. This is above that. If you can, Hwage Valley, and you continue and you turn right and go way up in the mountain, is this gorge. And the tea masters still come here. All the tea masters of that area, of whom there are hundreds, come up here to get their water, because this is said to be the purest water in all of Korea. This is the most pure, excellent, spring-fed, unpolluted, untouched water. So the tea masters come up here to get that in the Great Sage Valley, and he came here by the stream of very pure water, and he came to this rock. The stream was higher then, apparently, so higher. It's said that he crouched on this rock, and the Sei-am, that means washing ears rock, that he washed his ears, symbolically the corruption that he had been listening to, that not speaking certainly, but what he had been listening to, all this corruption in the capital city, this yap. You might think today, watching CNN and MTV, watching television, the news, and just the endless garbage coming at you, and it had just filled his ears. He came to this very pure place, used this very clean, pure water to wash his ears and make them clean and forget everything. So this still today is called the Washing Ears Rock, Sei-am, and is a famous tourist site that Koreans stop by. This black hackleberry tree is thought to be 1,000 years old, this tree, and the local people say, Chechiwan left his wooden walking stick that he brought from Gyeongju. He jammed it in the ground so he could go wash his ears, and he didn't take it back, and the stick stood there, and the stick sprouted and became this tree 1,100 years ago. Scientifically, this is doubtful, but and it's a common kind of story among great heroes among Korea, but that's what people say. And this tree is regarded as a holy tree. People pray here and leave offerings. Next, he moved over not far from the Daesung Geguk. The next valley over is where Cheonghakdong is. And the residents of Cheonghakdong say today that Cheonghakdong is the Blue Crane Village. were said to be the site of Taoist immortals. And today, this is the best Taoist center of Korea. This area is really where Korean Taoism is practiced. As I said, never really officially established in Korea, but in modern times, there are Taoist cults that claim that they've been operating for 2,000 years here or longer, etc. And this is one of the main Taoist cults of Korea. They say Che Chi-wan practiced the Taoist arts here. He started to learn Taoism from old sages who were living at this area. They say so. They claim so today. And this is a kind of festival, and so they build these giant stone mounds here. They have very colorful festivals of Korean Taoist culture, which is not so different from the Buddhist culture, a little more on the martial arts fighting stuff than Buddhists do, including sword practice, and very heavy on the green tea, just like the Buddhists are. In some ways, not so different, but with some different emphasis. And the mountain spirit traditions very strong with these people. This is their kind of symbol of course, Chunji-in, heaven, earth, and humanity. The round heaven, square earth, and the red triangle, humanity, human beings, as the trinity of the universe, basic Taoist concept from China, strongly practiced here. And they claim, this is from them, they have this official painting enshrined of Che Chi-wan. Notice this is very different from the other painting I just showed you, where he's a Confucian official. Here, this is very much a retired and Taoist-looking, free-floating with clouds and mountains and waterfall behind him instead of writing brushes, that Taoist angle. And this is a votive little card that they sell as a kind of souvenir. People buy this and keep it in their wallet for good luck. He's regarded that way here at Jirizan. Now, moving down, he's thought to have wandered around South Korea, and there's so many places claim Che Chi-wan was here, and it's just part of their prestige. One place that we think pretty much for sure he really went is right here, Busan and the Haeundae Beach. Haeundae Beach, which, is the most famous beach in Korea, right? And it has, like, in the summer, you can go there and you see like 700,000 people using the beach on one day. It's incredible. Now, he gave that name. He made the name Haeundae, which is clouds, ocean clouds platform, sea cloud platform. He made that name. And so the evidence is here. He built up a pavilion, suppose he built a wooden pavilion overlooking this beach. Of course, there were no buildings there at that time. There wasn't any beach culture or whatever. So 1,100 years ago, he built a wooden pavilion here, and he carved those names into the rock. This is now the Namimaru Pavilion, where they held the G20 summit a long time ago. And over here, his pavilion was here, and that's the Haeundae Beach. And that's the Sheraton Hotel now, the Sheraton Beach Hotel, and all the big hotels of that area. But he built his pavilion right over here, and this is the rock. It's preserved in color there. It has the Chinese characters that says Haeundae, ocean clouds platform, and that's supposedly Che Chi-wan carved that himself on the rock here. That's it from a distance there. It's preserved like that, the ocean. That's how that beach gets its name, the most famous beach in Korea. On top of that hill, that's this hill, on the top up here in the trees is this statue monument of him, Che Chi-wan, sitting there and around decorated with his poetry and some of his literature, things that he wrote. I haven't mentioned this yet, but Che Chi-wan is regarded as one of the founding fathers of Korean literature. He wrote quite a few poems that we still have and essays that we still have. Much of his production work was lost. He wrote quite a lot. Maybe we only have 1/3 of it available to us today, but still it's quite a lot of things. And he's one of the earliest figures that we have a lot of his writings. There's hardly anybody else who came before him that we have many writings from. We have like one poem or one epitaph carved on a rock from somebody from the Shilla era and such. He's one of the first figures that we can actually say we have literature from him, essays, historical recountings, and poetry and such. One of the founding fathers of Korean literature, and his samples of his work are enshrined around there, and biography samples and the typical Bisuk monument for him there. Busan City is very proud to be associated with him, to be known. Also in Busan City, not so far away, a little farther down, is Shinsundae Hill, which it has that name, Shinsundae. It means spirit immortal platform. Supposedly, at the peak of this hill overlooking the ocean, Chechiwon, local people, they say he became immortal spirit. But that didn't really happen until a decade later and such, so he somehow communed with the immortal spirits, or briefly became an immortal spirit and then came back to his body, something like that. It's not clear. But something of this nature happened here, and it's called Shinsundae, Spirit Immortal Peak, and this is one of the major ports of Korea. One of the major shipping ports. All these international ships come in here, and they have on the manifest, there's a docket, Shinsundae Port, berth 53 or whatever. Nobody has any idea what that means, but it's Spirit Immortal Platform is up there. It's a little difficult to get there by now because there's security. They don't want you looking over the port and photographing as I did, but I did get up there with my wife a while ago. I got up there on the peak, and there's just a simple platform that's now built there, a wooden platform and a very small stone monument, nothing else. But that's there. Using that name, Shinsun, Spirit Immortal, Shinsun. There are several peaks around Korea. There's about a dozen peaks named Shinsun Bong, or Shinsundae, meaning Spirit Immortal Peak, where some kind of spiritualization like this happened or was witnessed or supposed, and several of them are associated with Chechiwon in some way. And this is at Sosan City, way over on the west coast. This is Hosa University, right at the base of it. And if you go there to the university, they have a plaque, set up platform, and there's a Chechiwon did spiritual practice at the peak of this hill right here, and we call it Shinsunbong for that. Several such places in Korea, more than I could show you. Now, this, Chechiwon, in wandering around, he tended to go in the deep mountains, the holy places. He lived at Buddhist temples. This is now his new, kind of a renewed association closely with Buddhism. He would go and stay at Buddhist temples, and he would do them a service. They gave him a room, they gave him food, and in exchange, he would write the history of the temple. Now, Confucians are really good at this. This is kind of what Confucian education is all about, is writing history, reading history, and being able to write historical essays, gather all kinds of documents and evidence, and then put it together into a beautiful essay to tell some person's biography or the history of some place or whatever. That's what Confucians do. And Buddhists, maybe not so good at that. Buddhists have a huge libraries of spiritual documents and sutras and such like this, but until this point in Korean history, there's not a lot of great historical records that give in a very factual way how some temple started and the biography of great masters. There wasn't a lot before this. He sat down and did this. This is one of his very greatest for National Master Jingam Guksa, appointed National Master. This was carved in 887 when the National Master had just died, and Chechiwon wrote his biography and included in it the history of Sangesa Temple, one of the greatest temples of Korea, again, one of the top 20. It's there at Jirisan on the south side, Sangesa, right where the Green Tea Valley is. He included the history of the temple, the biography of Master Jingam, and the history of Korean green tea. He recorded how green tea seeds were very first brought to Korea in 828 exactly. Being a Confucian, he gives the exact details, and how they were brought, presented to the king, and then brought to this place and planted there. So we know that this is true. We know this really happened because Chechiwan wrote this in 887 and inscribed it on a piece of stone that's still standing there. And we have this as exact historical evidence. This is damaged during the Korean War. North Korean, there's a very famous monument, great national treasure. North Korean soldiers supposedly turned a machine gun on it and blasted it apart. And then after the war, it was reconstructed with these steel panels on the side. But it's one of our 300 national treasures, number 47. It's one of the greatest bisuk ever made. Believe it or not, this is me in 1987. I was thin, I was skinny, I was happening. It's the first time I visited this, and I was very impressed by it way back then. It's the first I ever heard of Chechiwan. And he made many of these around the country. He stayed at Buddhist temples and made these stone monuments of their history with biography. 4 of them still exist, survived history, the wars and the bombings and everything. 4 of them still exist. They're all 4 national treasures attributed to his reign and said to be some of the best literary writing in ancient Korean history. Just his style, his way of using Chinese characters, excellent. His way of writing. He's also associated with the Bingsan Gegok. This is quite different. This is up in North Gyeongsang province, high north, parallel to Andong, kind of north of Daegu, a rather obscure area. Not many people go here, but he was said to have hung around here in the summertime because this is a unique place with Punghil caves. Punghil means a wind source, energy focus place. These are special aspects of the Pungsujiri that I described last time, places with cooling air coming out of the earth. These holes like this and this, it's a natural air conditioning. If you stand there, an amazing breeze of very cold, downright cold air is coming out of here in the middle of summer. I was here in July, and if you sit down there on that rock and sit there and have it blowing on your back, you cool off, and within 10 minutes, it's too cold, really. You need to move or put on a jacket or something. It'll give you disease. Such cold air coming out of here. So Chechiwan was known to hang around here in the hot summertime as a Taoist practitioner, enjoying this natural cold air conditioning. This should be a really famous tourist site in the summertime. I don't know why lots of people don't go here. It's very pleasant. In particular, right there at this, there is a Buddhist temple. And so he lived at that temple, communed with the monks. It was once kind of a great temple. Today, all that remains is stone foundations and this pagoda. That's it. Everything else lost to the ravages of history. But this is there, the 5-story pagoda that's there. It is said that Chechiwan lived in a house building pavilion that was around here, and now nothing else. And these Punghil holes are here again with the cold air flowing out of them. And he built a pavilion there. There. Okay. Now we move back over to the West Coast. Where to the West Coast? Seongju Saji. I already mentioned this place before when I gave my lecture last year on the Gusan Sun Moon, the original 9 temples of Sun Buddhism, Zen Buddhism in Korea. This is one of them, one of the originals. And the master there was Muyam, who imported the Zen Buddhism from China and established his school in this place. No buildings remain, nothing is left, but this amazing set of pagodas that's there, and this, Chechiwan's historical monument that is there. This is it in that building compound there, and that's what the inscription looks like. He tells the whole history of Muyam importing the Zen Buddhism to Korea and establishing it in this area. So that's the 2nd out of 4 that he did. I only have 3 out of the 4 in there. Now, mentioning somewhere in here, he comes up with this idea, and it's recorded in the Samguk-sagi, which is our main source of history of the three kingdoms. From Goguryeo, Baekje, and Shilla, and the unified Shilla time, the main recording of history remaining to us, the Samguk-sagi, very large volume. In that, it is said that Chechiwan developed this idea of our country has a tradition, has a do meaning Tao, practice or way and such, a do called Pungyu, which is profound, mysterious, and sublime. Pungyu literally in Chinese characters means wind blowing, but the flowing of the wind, it's difficult to try to translate or conceptually get around that. It means much, much more than just flowing wind, as far as the circulation of energy in some kind of areas. He said this is a principle. Our country, Korea, has this principle called Pungyu, which is profound, mysterious, and sublime. Its source is described in detail, the Sunsa Immortals History. The history of the immortals, it's no longer extant. We don't know this document, but he's quoting from it. In fact, it combines the three doctrines, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The three doctrines, combines them, grafts them together so as to transform the people into sages, to make the people wise by combining these three traditions. And then he gives in details, it's to practice filial piety in the family. Loyalty to the nation was taught by Confucius. To practice not doing, wu wei, mu wei. Koreans say instruction without words was taught by Lao Tzu, the Taoism side. To practice good deeds, avoid all evil, thus improving karma towards enlightenment, was taught by the Buddha. And then combining those three together, harmoniously working together, then you have a human who can become a sage, a wise man, and a useful man to the community. So he come up with this concept of this Pungyu and defined it this way. It's quoted in the Samguk-sagi this way. This is the only time in the Samguk-sagi that term Pungyu is used. There's the Chinese characters, he especially meant refined, elegant, noble tastes in music, singing, and dancing as a cultural form. And so this term Pungyu is still mainly used in people who talk about Korean culture, especially music, the traditional gukak music. If you talk to those kind of musicians, people who play the gayagum and the sanjo things and do a salpuri dance, those kind of people, they talk about Pungyu as a high ideal of the richness of Korean culture, and yes, elements of the Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism in a harmony. They still use this concept today when they're teaching such things and talking about it, those kind of cultural people. And this is one of Che's great legacies with this. It's unfortunate that we don't have any real essay, a long essay where Che really explains what he's talking about. All we have is that brief quote that I showed you. That's all that remains to us. But it's enough to inspire people. Back to the sites. This is in Gyeongsan Bukdo, again, north of Andong, north of that Punghil cold air caves place. One of the most beautiful mountains in this area. Just a stunningly lovely, great place with a great Buddhist temple. Cheongyang-sa is there. This temple was started by Master Wonhyo, so 250 years before Chechiwan. Master Wonhyo started this temple. It is the largest remaining temple that Wonhyo founded. Out of some 70 temples attributed to Wonhyo, most of them are really very small, quite minor hermitages. This is the biggest remaining one that he founded, and Chechiwan went and lived there for a while, visited here periodically perhaps, and way up here on the cliff is a special place associated with him. This is the Cheongyang-sa Temple, great Buddhist temple, fantastic, wonderful place to visit. If you can, above the temple, way up on a cliff, a very difficult hike, is this, the Go-un-dae. Now, Go-un, I haven't mentioned yet, is Chechiwan's pen name. what he chose to use, Go-un, and that's how a lot of Koreans know him, a master Go-un, sage Go-un. Go-un means lonely cloud, or a lone cloud, a cloud that drifts alone. So that's him, in the mountains, temple to temple, wandering through the landscape, Go-un, and sometimes called Chiwan, because Chechiwan. Chiwande, this area still, it's used as a hermitage by the temple. People do meditation. There's a special cave and a spring water up there. This cave is called Go-un-gul Cave, the cave of Go-un. They say Chechiwan stayed and lived in that cave for a while. And his poetry, this is one of his poems inscribed there. Supposedly he wrote it himself, but we don't know that for sure, but it's inscribed there. And this is special water, Chongyungsu. Special water there, it means intelligence or understanding, mineral spring water. Chongmyeong, intelligent water. And it's still today, Korean mothers go up there with their children, bring these education mothers travel all the way here, bring their children and have them drink this water. Supposedly it makes you smarter. And Chechiwan is associated with that because of his brilliance. I don't know. Now, going down south of Andong, this is still in the Andong area, but now south of it, we're kind of on all sides of Andong here. Go-un-sa is named after him. Go-un, Lonely Cloud Temple. It's one of the great temples of Korea. It's one of the headquarters temples, one of the 31 district headquarters for this area south of Andong, and he lived there and he designed this pavilion for them. It's been reconstructed a few times because it's 1100 years ago, but so he made this design. It's a bridge and pavilion at the same time over a stream that's usually way down low here, but in heavy rain time rises up higher, and it forms a kind of bridge, but also meditation pavilion. It's still there at the temple, and it's said that he was the architect, gave them this idea. There's other views of it. It's quite charming. It's really the only building quite like this in any Buddhist temple. There's no other hall that's kind of quite like that. It's up on the stilts, but you don't go under it. There's no pathway to walk under it, so it's not like the usual lecture hall at the entrance of a temple. It is unique. Moving on, back to the Baekdu-daegan Mountains, the mainline stream of mountains right through the center of Korea, the backbone of Korea. Part of that is this mountain, Hwiyangsan, known as a very holy mountain. Bongam-sa is one of the great holy temples, again, of Zen Buddhism. It's one of the Gusan Sun Moon, one of the 9 original Zen temples. Chechiwan also stayed here for a while and wrote the history of Jijung-dae-sa and Bongam-sa Temple on this monument, which is National Treasure 315. This temple is so holy for Zen Buddhism, it is closed all year long. The public can only visit this temple one day per year, right? On Buddha's birthday holiday, which is coming up at the end of May this year. On that day, this is really crowded. The only day the public can come here, and 20,000 people always do. And such legendary traffic jams. So go early if you try, but it's a great temple of Korean meditation. Songchol Sanim, for example, the great 20th century master, was associated with this temple, held his great meeting for the reform of Korean Buddhism at this temple under Hyobong Sanim, under his authority to kick out the Japanese Buddhists and reestablish Korean Buddhism. That decision was made here in 1954, was it? Yes, something like that. This temple, and Chechiwan's monument there, telling the history. Now, we come to kind of the end of his life. He's getting to be an old man. 935 is exactly when the Goryeo dynasty begins. For 20 years before that, there was civil war, massive civil war, destroying the Shilla kingdom, bringing it finally down. Chechiwan just avoided the civil war entirely by being in the mountains, being in the Buddhist temples, etc. By 935, somewhere after that, he's gone, and people say he never died, but he goes onward from this. In particular, Gyasan Heinsa, one of our very greatest temples, starting in the around 800 AD, 50 years before Choi was born, but by the time the foundation of the Goryeo dynasty, this became one of the great temples because the abbot of this temple supported the guy who won the civil war and became the first king of the Goryeo dynasty. He was supported by this temple. So after the Goryeo dynasty established, this temple was rewarded, grandly rewarded with royal money and attention, became a big temple, important, even though it's very isolated. It's very far away from anywhere out here at Gyasan Mountain, but became one of Korea's big, great temples. Later, the Tripitaka Koreana, wooden blocks of the complete Buddhist screw set get moved here for protection because it's so isolated. And today it's one of the greatest temples of Korea, the temple of the Dharma, as people say. Choi was known to have lived here. There are records in the Samguk Sagi says, since last time here, the peak of Gyasan Mountain, 1430 meters, this peak right here, that kind of flat platform, that is said by most people is where Choi became a spirit. That one day he left from he was living at one of the hermitages of Heinsa Temple down here in the Heinsa's down here in the valley. This is one of the hermitages. Living in a hermitage, he left the hermitage one day just with his straw hat and his walking stick, straw shoes, and he hiked off into the forest. And people say, oh, Master Choi, old Master Choi, he's left, and he didn't come back. And like several days later, people saying, oh, well, what happened to Master Choi? And they went searching for him. They searched all over the mountainside, couldn't find. Finally, somebody got up to the peak of the mountain and found only his straw hat, hiking stick, and his shoes were there on the peak of the mountain. Only that, nothing else. And people said, he has become an immortal spirit. If you were cynical, if you were a nasty kind of person, you might suggest that maybe he was eaten by a tiger up there. But we are not cynical, nasty people. Immortal spirit. Why not? Okay. Heinsa Temple today, one of Korea's greatest temples in the Tripitaka Koreana, kept there. At the entranceway, going into Heinsa Temple, there's something very interesting. And it's interesting that they deny it, or at least they denied it to me. Going in there, there's a guksadang, which is a guardian spirit shrine, like many villages have and such. That name means usually it's a guardian spirit. It means national master shrine, but such a title is usually used for even just like a pile of rocks, a cairn of rock, as a guardian spirit shrine. So there's this Guksadang shrine. It was mostly locked up, but one time I came there and it was open, the door was open, so I went inside and took a look, and there was this on the altar, this painting, which is not your usual Buddhist sort of painting at all, and it's not really a shamanic painting either. What you have here, a guy with black hair, but no headgear, no hat, and that would really mean a retired man, no office, rather disheveled looking. He's got a rough beard, as if like, he's been out in the mountains for a long time. He's got kind of official robe, but rather shabby looking, nothing very official. And I'm thinking, this is a portrait made of Choi. Since he lived there at the temple, after he disappeared, they regarded him as a guardian spirit of this, a little bit like a mountain spirit, but not quite, but something, a guardian spirit here. But then I asked, I found monks there at the temple, at the office. I went to ask about this, and they said, no, it's not Choi, no. And I said, well, who is it? Who is that? And, well, what is that? And they said, no, it's Guksa. National master, that's it. And they got rather testy at me, denying it and just saying, no such thing. Later when I came there, that disappeared. About 6 years later, this was gone, and now it's gone. There's a simple Buddha statue now sitting on that wooden altar, and that's it. And they don't do that. On the side of the building, on the interior side, was also this painting, which are the peaks of the mountain peaks over here, forest, deep forest, and there's what looks like a very old man, in this case white clothing, an old man with white hair walking through the forest. I'm thinking, well, this is Chechiwan when he's 70 years old, disappeared into the forest, going to the peak of the mountain to spiritualize. That makes sense to me, that would be. But the monks at the temple said, no. Now, Haeinsa is very famous for, they tore down the mountain spirit shrine at Haeinsa. Master Songchul himself took out the mountain spirit painting and the dragon spirit painting, took them into the courtyard and burned them in front of all the other monks. And lectured that this should be done at every temple in Korea. We should purify, get rid of these folk elements and make a pure international Buddhism only. He was very hardline about this, Master Songchul. Controversial. I'm one of many who disagree with him and think that these folk elements, Taoist elements in Korean Buddhism are very charming and they make Korean Buddhism truly Korean, this sort of thing. But this would help explain why Haeinsa Temple was so much denying this and kind of denying it. Oh, Chechiwan, never heard of him. Woo! I took that photo, I'm trying to remember. It was in the 90s. It was in the 90s. It was before I published my book, but I didn't include it. So it was in the 90s, like late 90s. And I went back there in the early 2000s and it was gone. It's the most accuracy I can give you from this point. After he was gone, the kings of Korea, the kings of the subsequent Goryeo dynasty, enshrined him, ennobled him, made him, hundreds of years later, made him a great national hero. And this, by 1023 here, okay, so he must, well, he's not yet dead 100 years then, less than 100 years that he's been gone. The king orders his birthplace area, his exact birthplace, part of the Choi family mansion that I showed you before, part of their compound, to become a shrine, the Sangsujang Shrine and such. Sangsujang means sending a letter. Supposedly, Chechiwan, just before the Shilla dynasty totally collapsed, Chechiwan sent a letter to the first king of the Goryeo dynasty. Scholars think this didn't really happen, but supposedly he sent a letter saying that the trees are withering in Gyeongju, the leaves are turning yellow in Gyeongju, but the grass is growing fresh and green in Gaesong City. And that's where the founder of the Goryeo dynasty came from. And I mean, the new, fresh dynasty coming from there. It's just significant that the Goryeo dynasty made this official doctrine. It's probably not true as a story, but Chechiwan's reputation was so strong. He's such a cultural hero that by saying that he predicted, they're claiming that he predicted the next dynasty and that this guy would found the dynasty and that he approved of it, that he sent this letter saying, yes, you are the one to make a new dynasty, that really establishes the authority of the Goryeo dynasty in itself. His reputation is so strong. It's like today Republican politicians invoking Ronald Reagan or something, quoting him or something. You know, if he said it, it must be true. Some great hero figure. So they built this royal shrine for him, supposedly on the spot he was born, and put in this monument, which is a treasure of Korea, the stele Sage Goun. They gave him a new title, Munchang-hu, Cultural Beauty Lord, is his posthumous title, the Cultural Beauty Lord. Beautiful culture, Lord of beautiful culture, you might translate that. It was a Goryeo king, Gyeonjong, in 1023. Okay. Also in Gyeongju is the Soak Sowan, which was made around 1600. A Sowan, again, is a Confucian academy that enshrines a particular Confucian figure and functions kind of like a high school in advanced Confucian education with one particular Confucian figure. This is a unique Sowan in that it enshrines three figures. Chechiwan, General Kim Yu-shin. He's the army general who unified the three kingdoms, the one who defeated Goguryeo and Baekje and then defeated Tang Dynasty China to keep Korea's independence in those wars around 680 and made Korea as we know it today. General Kim Yu-shin, very much enshrined. And scholar Sol Chung, that's the son of Wonhyo. Master Wonhyo, Korea's most famous monk. I gave a lecture here a year and a half ago, I think, talking about Wonhyo, and he had his sex scandal. He had sex with a princess when he was about 60 years old. That resulted in a son, Sol Chung, who became the greatest Confucian scholar of time. That's him. So those three guys are enshrined in this Sowan in Gyeongju City. The reason why they are there, they are the three men, the greatest heroes of the Shilla kingdom, who are not a king and not a Buddhist monk. Shilla has so many heroes of its legendary history, so many great names like Wonhyo or whatever, but they're all kings or Buddhist monks, except these three are the greatest, who are neither. And so they are enshrined as Confucians. All the two of them, Choi and Sol Chung, are in the National Confucian Shrine right here in Seoul, what's called the Munmyo, all during the Joseon Dynasty. It's a huge shrine building that enshrines Confucius himself in the center, and on one side, the greatest Chinese Confucians, a dozen of them. On the other side, 18 Koreans, 18 greatest Korean Confucians, and these are the first two, Sol Chung, and the second one is Chechiwan, enshrined there. Munmyo, in Sungyungwan University. Sungyungwan University, which is now a modern university, claiming a 700-year history over on the northeast side of the palaces in Haehwadong there. This is at that Sowan in Gyeongju, the shrine for the three of them, and the pavilion. They still conduct Confucian education there, and offerings for their ceremony, including pork, so you know this is not a Buddhist ceremony. Yes, the offerings and such. And here I got photos in 2013. They start at midnight. They start the ceremony at midnight and go till like noon the next day, doing ceremonies for all three of these figures. It's quite a trial and such. And that has that culture, beauty, Lord inscription for Chechiwan and such for him. And this is the gentlemen doing their offerings. They still do this every single year at this. This is at the Holy Western Mountain. Now we get back to China in modern times. In Yangzhou City, as I said, they still remember Chechiwan. This gigantic building is just for him. It's a big shrine for Chechiwan and a museum upstairs about him that's all in Chinese, with very little English involved in such, and Korean tourists come there. I came here with the Gyeongju Che family when they were going to have a ceremony. This is in Yangzhou City of China, and it's a tourist attraction for Chinese people, as well as the Koreans who visit China. Of course, not too many people go to Yangzhou. It's not the most famous place, but it's here. And there, they got this statue. They made a modern statue of Chechiwan right here and doing a Korean-style ceremony for him these days. There's a Gyeongju Che family, the luminaries lined up in front here, and they're doing the ceremony here for them. I have a whole webpage just about this, you want to see on my website. Also, in the ancient capital of Xi'an, which is where Chechiwan went to study, where he took the exam, when he went to study at 12 years old, took the exam 18 years old, Xi'an City. Just south of Xi'an is the Zhongnangshan Mountains, the south terminal mountains, which are very holy, very famous place of Chinese Taoism. It's where Lao Tzu, the famous Lao Tzu, composed the Tao Te Ching philosophy and such in these mountains, where it all started. And this is a shrine devoted to Korean Taoist sages there in China. It's something I never heard of before, and I had no idea this existed until I went there. And such, this rather large shrine, which has been reconstructed in modern times here in the valley, a remote valley, very kind of difficult to get up there, but we did. And the shrine in there. This is the main hall of that shrine, and Choi Wan. A statue of Choi Wan is enshrined there by the Chinese and the Chinese Taoists. Recognize him. All right, and the final kicker, right above that temple is this amazing peak, the Hyundeo Dan in Korean. That's the Korean pronunciation of this. Amazing peak, platform peak for Taoist practices. This is my shot from down in the parking lot looking up at it. It's way up there, and this is in their brochure what it looks like. This guy, another Korean, Kim Ga-gi, a royal Korean prince, traveled to China, practiced Taoism, became a great Taoist immortal there around the same time as Wisang. Supposedly he went to China at the same time as Master Wisang went to China to get the Huaom Buddhist teachings. He came there and he studied Taoism, stayed in China, never went back to Korea, became a great Taoist master. 200 years later, followers, disciples, people said that they witnessed up on this peak, they saw Kim Ga-gi appear in a physical form and then spiritualize in flames up to heaven, ascended to heaven in spiritual form. And this is traced to 856, which is just the same year anyway that Choi Wan's mother was going at Baek Unsan praying for his conception, praying for him to be conceived within her. We don't know if it's the same month or anything like that, the same day, anything, but when he spiritualized, it was the springtime, and that's Choi Wan's mother supposedly in the springtime prayed for his conception. And is there some connection here? God only knows. We will leave that to speculation, but that's the final. I have more about him, more is here about all these places. Every one of these places I've shown you, there's more photos of them and more information on there. That's all we have time for here. Essentially then, in conclusion, Choi Wan representing a harmony of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, things that we think of as separate and perhaps conflicting. And a lot of Buddhists in Korea are pretty hardline about this, of only Buddhism, Buddhism itself only. But Choi Wan representing this kind of alternate idea. Buddhists do regard him as enlightened. I have asked Buddhist masters, like at Busoksa, Choi Wan, he was enlightened. Yes. He was a kind of Buddha himself. Korean Taoists consider him their primary hero. Korean Confucians consider him the sage of all sages from ancient times. Anyway, all Koreans respect him and love him as a cultural figure, a founder of their literature. Within him is a personification of that these paths can get along, that they can combine, and that we can combine in our life path if we don't become a monk. There are ways of following also Confucianism, also Taoism. There are ways that we can end up enlightened and some kind of sage and possibly even an immortal. Choi Wan is an exemplar of the best of all that. He should be on the money. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. I'm going to turn this into a book. I want to write a book about Choi Wan. Look for it by the end of the year, maybe. The Kyungju Che family really wants me to write it. We'll see if I do. If that happens. But there's no proper biography of him in English. Nobody's ever done that. I don't know why. But I'm going to try to put something together with all these photos and his legacy. Questions? Anything?
Thank you. I have a question for you more about the Korean monks who might have traveled to China. Did the Koreans have any, Buddhist Koreans have any influence on the Buddhism in China?
Well, yes. Some Korean The most famous to us is Korean monks who traveled to China, got the teachings, and brought them back to Korea. They became the most famous ones here. There are some Koreans who stayed in China, including one Korean very early in the Shilla time who traveled all the way to India. Made it all the way to India and was an important guy to pick up scriptures that were unknown in China, brought them back to the capital of China, to that big wild goose pagoda that was their translation center, and spent the rest of his life there as a translator and a teacher of the sutras. Never made it back to Korea. He is still well known within the history of Chinese Buddhism as one of the great ones. There are one other from the Shilla kingdom from the 700s, a guy named Kim, the rest of the name I forget, from Daewonsa Temple in the Cholanamdo, that's now in Cholanamdo, a great temple. One of the subsidiaries, traveled over to China and went to a holy mountain, a holy shamanistic mountain that is now called Jiwashan, the exemplary flower mountain, and he practiced for Jijang Bosal, the mercy and compassion and such of Jijang Bosal, saving all beings from suffering, and practiced so hard for the rest of his life, for the next 50 years, that attracted a great following, and rich people came, gave big donations, and temples were built, and he just kept practicing and practicing, and perfectly humble and pure. And when he died, Chinese people said he is Jijang Bosal. He is the earthly manifestation of this, and he's still enshrined there. And they still say he's a Korean guy that became the manifestation of Jijang Bosal. And then a third one, by the very beginning of Goryeo, you've heard of Tiantai Buddhism. Koreans say Chuntae Bulgo, heavenly platform Buddhism. It used to be very important, equally important to the Hwaom Buddhism we have strongly here today. It's a theoretical, a scholastic kind of Buddhism, studying the Lotus Sutra and other sutras. Tiantai Buddhism, it was one of the big schools of Chinese Buddhism as a scholastic school, equal to the Huayan school, competing for royal money. And by the end of the Tang Dynasty, it failed. It was wiped out. They lost government funding. And scholastic Buddhism is just like, say, a university, like Dongguk. If you lose all your money, you're out of business. You just stop. The monks simply would go to other temples and practice other kinds of Buddhism, whoever had money to support them. And so that kind of Buddhism lost. 75 years later, the Tang Dynasty had broken up, and the king of what was then Northeast China, he was interested in Buddhism, trying to study, and he came across Tiantai Buddhist scriptures, and he's studying, he can't understand. He called his Buddhist monk advisors, and they said, Your Majesty, this is Tiantai Buddhism. It's gone now. Nobody understands this stuff. But one monk, he said, I heard that in Korea, they still have this kind of Buddhism. They've preserved it. It still flourishes. And so this king of eastern China, the eastern seaboard, around what is now Shanghai, he sent a message to Korea, to the king of Korea, the early Goryeo, and asked for help. And the king of Goryeo assigned the monk Payak, Master Payak, a master of this scholastic Buddhism. He traveled back to China, brought back the full scriptures with him, which had been preserved and recopied in Korea, brought it back to Korea. The king gave him money. He went to the original mountain, the original temples of Tiantai Buddhism, where it had first started around 500 AD. And this is about 1075 AD. All right. He went back to that mountain and restarted it. Moved into the temple, had it repaired, attracted young Chinese as disciples, and got it going again. And I only discovered that when I first went to China in 1983, I heard that this temple was now open to tourism. This great historic temple at Tiantai Mountain. It was like an 8-hour journey by bus from the Shanghai area in those days on bad dirt roads. Very difficult. I got there, I caused an uproar. I was actually arrested in the village because they had no idea what a foreigner was doing out there in rural. This is 1983. They thought I was a CIA spy or something. I had a camera with me. They didn't know what a tourist was. I made it to the temple, and there was a monk who could speak a little bit of English, who had been college educated, saved my life. He took me in. He told me I was the third white guy, meaning the third white person to ever come to that temple. So I get in there and I get to spend the night, and I got to interview with the master. And the master had a painting of an ancient master on the wall. And I told him, I live in Korea, I'm teaching English in Korea. At that time, Korea and China were enemies, there was no contact. And he pointed to the portrait on the wall. He said, oh, that's our founding master, that's Payak. He's a Korean. He came from Korea and he restarted this kind of Buddhism. Oh, we still bow to him every day. And such. So he's remembered. Those are 3 examples out of many. In fact, there was not only just Buddhism coming from China to Korea and then from Korea to Japan, there was movement back. Of course, Master Wonhyo, his writings, his genius writings had a big influence in China. Chinese Buddhists still study the stuff that he wrote, very influential in the formation of Zen Buddhist philosophy and others. So, yeah. Long answer to a simple question, but anyway, that kind of example, there's a lot of stuff. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. Dharma path.